Okay. Forest health in a context of truth and healing. So my thought here was to try to bring together two conversations I see happening at the state level in particular that I don't think are as connected as they could be, or possibly connected at all. So I'd like to start with Executive Order N1519, which is an executive order signed by Governor Newsom. And I'm going to share with you, it does at least three things. One is it bears witness to the violent, exploitative history between the state of California and Indigenous peoples of California. It quotes the first governor, Peter Burnett, who resolved a war of extermination against Indigenous peoples in California. It acknowledges that the state of California has not meaningfully recognized many tribal governments in California. It recognizes the resilience and strength of Indigenous peoples in California. It notes that there's a gap, that there's a lack of education and information about Indigenous peoples in California. We may all be familiar with some of the misinformation in the school systems, for example, the fourth grade mission curriculum, which does not attest to the true history of the missions as they impacted Indigenous peoples in California. It also acknowledges that the state has never apologized for these wrongs perpetrated against Indigenous peoples in California, and as such will be moving forward, has moved forward to establish this Truth and Healing Council. And that part of this executive order also apologizes. There are a lot of different apologies that have happened internationally to Indigenous people. They are critiqued in different ways in terms of how far does an apology go towards really addressing some of the lived issues and ramifications of the actions. But the apology recognizes that the state actually sanctioned genocidal violence towards Indigenous people. It commends and honors the resilience and strength of Indigenous Californians, and it also apologizes. And I have in the background here the treaties negotiated between the federal government and Native nations in California. And those treaties were not ratified due to pressure in part from the state of California because the land was so valuable. So again, the executive order on truth and healing here bears witness, apologizes, and then convenes this council. And the council reaffirms that meaningful consultation should be happening between the state and Native American nations in California. And this council will document, record, examine, listen to narratives of the history between the state and Indigenous peoples in California to clarify the record in the spirit of truth and healing. So if you visit the Native American Heritage Commission website, you can learn more about the Truth and Healing Council and who the members are. So I'd like to put this in conversation with forest lands and forest stewardship in the state of California. And I'm turning to some archival documents from the Plumas National Forest from up in Mountain Maidu country in northeastern California. And in this region at this time, the Plumas National Forest had just been founded in 1905, became a national forest in 1907. This letter is dated 1909, and it goes on for 20 some pages, documenting many different people who were Indigenous people, Maidu people mostly, living within their homelands, who had been living there, some of them from very prominent families known for maintaining basketry, a lot of environmental knowledge, very detailed knowledge about different plants, and a lot of stewardship over a long period of time, since time immemorial. So all of these people are documented, and the Forest Service officer recommends that, quote, some kind of permit should be issued for them to continue to stay there. And this land is referred to suddenly as public land versus as their homelands, as it had been and continues to be. So the question of how did Indigenous people's homelands in California become public land and state land that now we are looking to develop improved management priorities for. So how did homelands become public land is the first question. Then I'm going to switch back to another executive order from Newsom from 2020 on biodiversity. This is important, recognizes the importance of biodiversity in California, the need for partnerships, and it really mentions tribes. It does refer to them as tribes and other stakeholders, which is problematic since tribes are governments, but it recognizes specifically that California indigenous people have stewarded, managed, and lived interdependently with the lands that now make up the state. So there's explicit recognition of indigenous California knowledge of landscape, stewardship, and enhancement and protection of biodiversity. However, there's a history which we can bear witness to with the truth and healing perspective, that indigenous peoples in California were heavily criminalized for their stewardship. This is an example of a letter from 1918 on the Klamath National Forest. It calls out illegal, so-called illegal burning, and it accuses indigenous people in this region of setting fires in a spirit of not caring, and advocates violence toward them, direct violence. And this is a letter from 1918, so not that long ago, within the 20th century. So stewardship, indigenous stewardship in California has been heavily criminalized. So how do I bring these things together? And I think Val's presentation will help make that connection as well. Connecting truth and healing with land stewardship in a context of climate change. So as we all know, a century of fire suppression and active exclusion of indigenous land stewardship has contributed to the decline of forest health in California. And this is becoming more dire with climate change, with increasing catastrophic fire. And there's a need, I think, for indigenous ingenuity, to draw on Dan Wildcat, who's a professor at Haskell. He calls it indigenuity, indigenous traditional knowledge, land stewardship, in order to bring these forests back into a healthy condition. So I'm going to pause there and bring up Val's slides, Chairman Lopez's slides.
Thank you very much, Beth Rose. Dr. Middleton, thank you. My name is, again, is Valentin Lopez, and I'm the chairman of the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band. And we descend from the indigenous peoples that were taken to Mission San Juan Bautista and Santa Cruz. What we'll talk about tonight is just the relationship with fire, and show how, and it's, and the relationship with fire people have now is that people are really afraid of fire. They see fire as a threat, they see fire as a danger, and as being something negative and bad. But to all the indigenous people, we see fire as being sacred. Fire is a gift given to us. Next slide, please. Fire is a gift that was given to us from Creator. And we have a long story about that, of how fire was brought to the people. And it was brought to the people by hummingbird. And you see here the hummingbird with the red throat, and that's because he's carrying the coals from the underground to our people. And that gift is important. It provides warmth for our people, fire allows for cooking. Next slide, please. It allows for the cooking of our foods. And then fire also allows for light in the dark. But fire is important as well for ceremonies and dance. When we dance, we have a fire in the middle of the dance floor there, and the dancers dance around it. And that fire, with those dancers going around, a lot of people don't understand that, but those fires going around, they're collecting the prayers and the messages and the hopes and the desires and the anxieties from the people attending that ceremony. And then they take it and they give it up into that flame. And then that smoke carries those messages up to Creator and allows Creator to know the people that are there at that ceremonies to understand who the people are and what their needs are and what their prayers are for. And when we pray, we'll burn smudge and we'll hold an abalone shell and the smudge stick, and we pray into the smoke. And the smoke carries up our prayers, and it carries up not only the words of our prayers, but it carries what's in our hearts and our bodies and our minds and our spirit. And and that's a very important way that indigenous people use fire for ceremony. Fire is also a tool for managing landscapes. And we're going to talk about that pretty specifically now. It's a tool for managing landscapes. Our creation story tells us that Creator gave us the responsibility to take care of Mother Earth and all living things. And our people did that. We can go to the next slide. Did that for thousands of years. And you can, at first contact, those early explorers, they came across on the ships and they looked at the landscape and they saw these mosaics on the mountainsides and stuff like that. They were just beautiful colors of all the different plants, but they were all in patches, and they called it a beautiful mosaic, of a park-like setting. And those early explorers, they thought that that was just accidental or coincidental, that it just happened that way. And they didn't recognize that that right there was a result of indigenous stewardship of our people for thousands of years. And those plants and those trees, they represented our grocery stores, our drug stores, our, the pharmacy. They and they represented our hardware store, and stuff for tools and basketry and foods and medicines and etc. And then we can go down 2 slides, Beth, please. And then fire, the central coast of California, whenever that first expedition into California, they saw that landscape of the central coast. And as I said, they thought it was purely coincidental, but they also documented the use of fire by indigenous people all the way up. And members of our tribe, working with others, have documented, the landscapes that were being set by indigenous people along the way. But the central coast of California was a coastal prairie, and it was managed by our people with the use of fire, and it kept the forest trees from encroaching onto that coastal prairie. And that coastal prairie is recognized as one of the most biodiverse landscapes in North America. And it was, and it was much needed by the insects and animals. And that biodiversity, now we talk about loss of biodiversity, was along the coastal prairies that a lot of the biodiversity was lost. Whenever the Spanish came in with the mission system in 1788, I believe it was, they outlawed burning. Under the Mexican period, they outlawed burning. And of course, under the California American period, burning has been outlawed as well. And so what has happened is that all those trees have encroached on that coastal prairie. And that coastal prairie now is almost all gone. It's hard to find intact grasslands along the coast of California. The way our people would burn is they would take a look at a landscape and they would divide it into segments. It could be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 or 10 different segments. And then they would burn one segment each year. And when they got done with that last segment, they would go back and start all over. And that did a number of things. That kept those trees from encroaching on that coastal prairie. It prevented the huge buildup of fuel loads that we witness today and those catastrophic fires. But they were also important for the cultural resources. that first year burn, a lot of the seed plants, they need heat and fire to help germinate, to help them germinate. Um, and so that first year growth after the fire, you would get a huge production of the seed plants, and they would come up. And that was a very important food source for the birds and other seed-eating animals. And for people, and the native diet was 40% seed during that period of year. And they were also good because you're allowed, they stored very well, and you could store them for year-round use. The second year, you started getting taller shoots off the ground, and there were very uh, the preferred foods for the deer, the elk, and other grazing animals. Those shoots were juicy, they were moist and soft, and and so the elk and the deer and the other grazing animals, they learned to pay attention to those burn patterns and where they needed to be in 2 years. The third year of plants would be bushy, and those bushy plants provided a lot of the food, the food greens and vegetables that for people. They were also important, as for use as coordinates, traps, basketry, but they're important for wildlife as well because they allow the smaller animals, the mice, the rabbits, the squirrels, etc., to hide under that bushiness and stuff like that, to be protected from the predator birds overhead, etc. So that third year was very important. And then the subsequent years, the plants would start getting thicker and taller, and then they became important for the larger crafting um, resources of the tribe, for housing, for clothing. Um, they were used for bows and arrows, etc. And so there was a real balance and approach how they did the burns, and that also managed the landscapes. And then the burns, when you would burn at that kind of interval, the fires do not get very intense. The fires, when you burn at that interval, the fires will just creep along the ground. And they do not, and in most cases, they very seldom will start trees on the tree trunks on fire, or people would go through and cut the lower hanging branches before the fire so you wouldn't get those ladder fuels going up into the trees. They also, I said that the fire was sacred. Whenever we would burn, whenever we would burn in open spaces and stuff like, well, an oak woodland is a good example. Whenever we would burn in an oak woodland, that was ceremonial, because as that tree would, as that fire would creep through the oak woodland and stuff, um, it would have the benefit of killing the ticks and other insects in the ground that were impacting that oak tree. And then that smoke would go up into the tree, and the way that we smudge ourselves prior to ceremony or prior to praying was the same for the tree. We saw it as a healing, as a cleansing, as a blessing for the trees. And so that was a ceremonial aspect. Also, when that smoke would go up into the trees, that smoke would choke out the insects that were in the tree, and they would fall to the ground. And so the production of acorns that you got for the year or two afterwards was a much better quality, not having the impact by the insects. Then for our tribe, then came the mission and the Spanish period, and that was brutal to our people. They wanted, the goal of the Spanish and the missionaries was to destroy our culture, destroy our spirituality, our indigenous knowledge, and our humanity. And um, and that was followed by the Mexican period with the same thing. It was very destructive and very cruel to our ancestors. And then came the American California period, which was also just horrible. All three of those periods of colonization, they wanted to just destroy our people, our cultures, our spirituality. In 1493, there was a papal bull issued by the Pope, and that Pope is recognized as the doctrine of discovery. And that encouraged the European Christian countries to go out and explore the world and to claim those countries for those European nations and to ensure that the indigenous people became citizens. They converted to the Christian religion. And it said that if they did not convert, they were to be killed. And as a result of that, millions, I mean, I've heard estimates as high as 300 million indigenous people were killed as a result of those papal bulls. And those papal bulls in the United States, there was a Macintosh versus, I forget the name of that Supreme Court decision, but Johnson versus McIntosh, I believe it was now. And it said, and that just said that the doctrine of discovery shall be the law of the land for the United States. And so that is basically saying that for indigenous people, that we were expected to convert to be the citizens of that country, and in this case, probably American citizens, and to become and to convert to the Christian religion, or we were to be killed. And that's what gave the authority, and from the Pope, the moral authority for a lot of the actions that happened to the indigenous people. Today, the Amah Mutsun are working to restore the coastal prairie that I talked about, that provided that return, that the biodiversity. Um, we located a significant site, historical site. It was a first contact site with the very first expedition into California at Quiroste Valley. And Quiroste Valley is 8-10 miles south of Pescadero on the coast. And we did research there. We did a lot of research there with UC Berkeley, Stanford, UC Santa Cruz, and others to try to learn in an effort to try and restore the knowledge of our ancestors, what those landscapes looked like prior to first contact. And after that, and then as part of that research, we wanted to learn that so that we can start restoring our landscapes back to their indigenous conditions prior to first contact. And so we have the goals of our we developed a land trust in 2012. The goals of our land trust are to preserve and protect our known cultural and sacred sites, to do research related to help us restore the indigenous knowledge of our ancestors, including the knowledge of how to take care of Mother Earth, and also research to tell the truth about about our Native American history. The third thing was to educate the public and educate our members on the proper ways, on the true history, but also how to take care of Mother Earth as our ancestors did. And that's why I'm here talking to you today. And then the fourth goal was to develop a stewardship course so that we can have tribal members out there working on the coast and working in our traditional territories to help restore those lands. So today we're trying to return biodiversity for foods, medicine, basketry plants, take care of the animals who rely on them, and to rebuild topsoil. When you get those catastrophic fires, it gets so hot, it just kills all the nutrient values in the soil. And those nutrient values are the topsoil. And so we're just sterilizing the soil. And there was a report in the United Nations several years back that said we only have 60 years of topsoil in the world, and then there's going to be mass starvation. So So that's a real concern. Um, with that, I'm going to stop there and pass it back to Beth Rose. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Val, or Chairman Lopez. I think one of the really powerful elements of the work that you and Amah Mutsun Land Trust and Amah Mutsun Tribal Band do is that you combine healing landscapes with healing people, with a focus on on restoration of community and individual health at the same time as restoring land. So it's a very powerful combination. Thank you. So I would like to help us sort of think about truth and healing alongside what's happening with forestry in California. Some of the big news agreeing among many things to treat 1 million acres per year in California, and they need interventions prescribed. Trump's was about cultural burning. He talked about burning spiritual importance and how that's integrated with its practical subsistence importance. They're all one and the same, and that cultural burning is different from prescribed fire because it's a relationship, taking care of it. So I'll come back to that in a moment, but other objectives for this agreement include developing a forest health workforce, increasing agreements for cross-jurisdictional management, and
Beth, it seems like we've lost you there for a minute. So we will give Beth Rose a moment to come back to us. There she is. All right.
hello. I'm not sure what happened. I got booted off, but glad to be back, and I'll jump back in here. Okay, so I hope it doesn't kick me off again, but I was talking through this agreement between federal and state partners. Who's missing here? I don't see tribes included in this agreement. So that leaves some challenges and opportunities. I see a gap potentially between the commitment to truth and healing, which is amazing work, but not as I see it connected to the strategies to improve forest health. And there are more opportunities to include tribes, recognized and unrecognized, in restoring forest health around the state. And this is from Val, so Chairman Lopez, so he will talk about it more. But one of the things we were talking about as we were preparing for the presentation is the importance of health, of healthy partners, and that's both the state and tribes, and healing on the part of both parties, not only those who have undergone the violence, but also the perpetrators of that violence. Val, would you like to say more about that?
Thank you, Beth Rose. Um, I want to give a little bit of background. Um, our tribe, eh, well, you heard in my bio that I'm a Native American advisor to the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And so I do a lot of work. My two passions in life are working with the mentally ill and the tribe. And our tribe knows the work that I do in mental illness. And so I get a lot of calls from our members. And you know, when I became chair, in 1 week I got 4 just really hard calls to take. And I just sat there and said, how could our tribe ever be successful if we're dealing with these things? We have to find a way to address that, you know, to help our members. And so we started holding tribal wellness meetings, and we hold them the first Saturday of every other month. We just held one this past Saturday. And we've been doing that for over 12 years. In November was our 12th year. And we've learned a lot there about truth and healing. And one of the things we found, one of our tribe, they were terrible at finding mates. And so we had we had a wellness meeting for our elders to talk to your youth to help them find a mate and what the qualities they should look for and what we ended up talking about. And that turned into a 3-session meeting because that was a popular and an interesting topic, how to find a mate. But what we found out, or what we concluded, is to have a healthy relationship takes two healthy individuals. You can't have a healthy relationship when one person is healthy and another person is not. It won't work. And if two are not healthy, then you have disaster. So we actually, in our wellness meeting, we extended that. Well, what about our other partnerships? And that's our partnerships with the outside world from our tribe. And so we said the same applies to them. If the outside partners, they have to get healthy themselves. And we say, how healthy can the state of California be when it passes the laws, when they allow, when they were paying bounty money to kill Indians, when they were paying militias to go up in the mountains and hunt down Indians and to kill them. And then that horrible abuse never stopped. It continues to this day. It continues to this day when we have oppressive laws that allow them to continue to destroy our important sacred sites and our cultural sites. When it allows the laws, when it allows you to see Berkeley as a good example to hold on to the remains of our ancestors, and for many years look at it as their property. And those are the remains of our elders, and it just went on and on. And so we say that not only do the Native people need to heal from that horrific history, but perpetrators need to heal from their soul wound. And we're willing to work together on healing, but we're not willing to just say, well, let's just forget about it and let's just move forward and find new ways path forward. That won't work. I'll stop there, Beth Rose. I probably took long. I wanted to give that background. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Val. I appreciate it. And so, we were talking about healing as including both the state and tribes and land and building healthy forests. So there are some opportunities and tools we can look to. Tribally led cultural burning and other forest health projects. You heard some examples from Amah Mutsun Tribal Band and Amah Mutsun Land Trust. There's also a great deal of work led by Northwestern California, by Norfolk Mono, by Don Hankins, who's Plains Miwok at Chico. There are people, Indigenous fire practitioners and leaders who are doing some incredible projects. I have a couple pictures here. One is from the Maidu Summit Consortium in Northeastern California and their work to restore Tasmamkoyam or Humbug Valley. And there we're planting some native plants after burning. And then below is a picture of Diana Almendarez, who's Nisenan, Wintun, Hoopa, and she is a leader with the Tending and Gathering Garden at the Cache Creek Nature Preserve. And in this picture, she's teaching us about using traditional burning to restore some of the native plants there. Conservation and cultural easements can be legal property tools to enable indigenous management agreements are very important and enable tribes to manage and steward and restore lands within their homelands that, for example, have been presumed to be public land, as I showed in an earlier slide. To take a moment and try to imagine the disjunct of your home being suddenly deemed public land, and then you need to ask permission and cannot carry out your responsibilities to care for it. They do enable taking care of homelands that are now under other jurisdictions. So restitution and return of properties for Indigenous stewardship, education and research collaborations. Chairman Lopez referred to several partnerships with UC Berkeley, Stanford, and other institutions to study the effects of cultural burning. I think that the literature on cultural burning is growing. Some of the authors include Dr. Frank Lake, Dr. Jonathan Long, Dr. Don Hankins, but there's still a lot of research to be done. And I think there are a lot of partnerships that could be developed to show some of the multifaceted impacts and co-benefits of cultural burning for forest health as well as community health and healing. We also talked about, preferential hiring as well as no bid contracts. Uh-oh, we might have frozen.
I think you're back now, Beth Rose.
Oh, good. Val, did you want to say any more about preferential hiring and no bid contracts? You're muted.
I think that that's particularly important for non-recognized tribes because, whenever work comes up with, like state parks or national parks and such, even county parks, they have a low bid requirement, and we can't compete with organizations that, that like the CCCs and such organizations like that. We just can't compete with that, and so it's so important, and it's important that our people have access and have those jobs, but the current laws just don't allow that. So that's why we put in the preferential hiring and no bid contracts, particularly on areas that are important that have cultural importance to them.
Thank you. Offered a bridge and some ideas for thinking about how to move forward as the state not only looks at truth and healing and learning with and attempting to bear witness to and address all of the work that the Truth and Healing Council is doing. And there are a lot of opportunities, I think, to link that work to forest health, because forest health and community health are intertwined. So we'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Middleton Manning and Chairman Lopez, to you both. Excellent presentation. And now I will open up the chat to questions. So anyone who has anything to ask, please go ahead and put your question in the chat. We can, yeah, that would be the best way to do it. We can also try to use hand raising, but I can't even see everybody on my screen, so that'll be a little bit trickier. Hopefully we'll see a few questions pop up. I wonder if people are just typing at this point. Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. Our first question from Laura Young. She asks, have we seen any changes in fire management practices yet? So I will.
I can tell you what we've seen, and I'm speaking for the Amah Mutsun, is a lot more talk about the need to bring back indigenous burning after having experienced those catastrophic fires that we did in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Prior to that fire, whenever we would mention it, everybody would get scared, and I just saw no path forward for us ever to bring fire to the landscape. But once those fires hit and people saw how devastating they were and complete they were and stuff like that, people recognize now that we need to do something different. And there's a lot of talk and a lot of efforts There's a lot of talk and a lot of efforts about how to bring back indigenous burning and prescribed fires. Um, there's a, and we also refer to indigenous burning as cultural burns, because we're burning them not only to reduce the fuel loads or to reduce the fire risk, but we're reducing them to take care of the cultural resources. And we consider those cultural resources to be our relatives. You know, we're talking about that relationship. You know, we have they're our relatives, and we're, to take care of wildlife and to take care of the plants and trees. So fire and those cultural burns are done for that purpose, as you know, and fuel reduction both.
Thank you. Beth Rose, anything to add?
I see a lot more discussion of prescribed fire than cultural burning. And I also don't want to leave out the fact that there are tribal fire crews who do prescribe fire, not necessarily cultural burning. So there's definitely a distinction between those two practices, and there are tribes and tribal entities that engage in either or both. And so I tried to call out like this emphasis I see in the memo on prescribed fire, and there's a lot of conversation about getting more prescribed fire on the landscape, but it doesn't necessarily engage collaboration with Indigenous peoples, leadership of Indigenous peoples, or consider that whole kind of depth of history and the opportunity for healing and relationship building in that small underburns, low intensity burns.
Thank you. Our next question is from one of our students in SBIM 183, which is the forestry capstone class. Sabrina has a question specifically for Chairman Lopez. She asks, what is it like working and collaborating with research universities? What has worked for you and what hasn't? And what are your suggestions for research institutions and individual researchers trying to work with and for Indigenous groups? It was a long question, and I'll repeat any of it that you want.
I think I understand, and if I don't, you'll fix it. You know, we talk about only having healthy relationships, and you say, well, we talk about having healthy relationships, but look at the history of Berkeley. How can that be? We only work with people working to help to help the environment. You know, I work with the archaeologists is to study the environment, you know, the landscapes and stuff like that, so that we can restore it. We work with the state parks and state recs because we're taking care of the lands. We work with counties in the same way, the land trust and the conservation organizations. We work with them. We believe that all these organizations, they want to take care of Mother Earth. They want to heal Mother Earth. But we also believe that they don't know what they're doing. And they need Indigenous people to show them and to teach them. And so that's, you know, and that's the work that and that's what we're doing. Now, we don't work with Department of Education and stuff like that, because if they don't tell the truth, why would we want to deal with them? You know, if they come to us and say, you know, we want to tell the true histories and stuff like that, we'll work with them, but that hasn't happened yet.
Thank you, Chairman Lopez. We have another question here in the chat. Adina, and I think that's Adina Merlinder, says, so glad you mentioned biodiversity. Do you see opportunities for Indigenous stewardship related to the California Biodiversity Collaborative? So I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with that entity, but there is a link if not.
So I did look it up, and it looks like it came out of that executive order that I mentioned. So it does have at its foundation an intent to collaborate with tribes, and also a recognition of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous stewardship as as constitutive of maintaining and enhancing biodiversity. I also saw a video of support from an employee of the Yurok tribe, so it looks like it's been collaborative, but I don't know much about it in terms of practice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add because I'm not familiar with it. I do want to add one thing to my last answer, if you don't mind me going back. And I asked about research going forward. You know, one thing that we say is that we tell the people here today that what happened to the indigenous people is not their fault. They weren't the ones that were paying the bounty monies. They weren't the ones that were, going up in the mountains, and malicious to kill Indians. They're not the ones that did it. And the people on this meeting here today are not the ones that did it. But we do ask it, though, is that they recognize that they benefit greatly from that destruction of the indigenous people. And every day they put their feet down on the ground when they get out of bed, they're putting their feet on stolen land. And to remember that and to think about that. But we asked for people today is to help us restore our traditions, so help us restore our ways and our knowledge, and help us restore our culture and our spirituality, and to fight and get back to where we can have our communities be healthy and provide. So we ask for people to help us in those ways. And so whenever we have research that works, they can help us achieve that. That's meaningful research for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Lopez. And I'm going to follow up. I'm going to jump down in the chat a bit. So if anyone's monitoring, don't worry, I will get back to you. But we have a follow-up question from Stacy Frederick on this subject. She quotes a blog post which recommends that universities can support community-based research that values Indigenous perspectives and control over the knowledge building process. Would you agree, I guess, with that statement or recommendation? And if yes, are there any additional thoughts on what academic institutions can do to really, I think, value Indigenous perspectives and, grant that control over the knowledge building process?
I think a good example here is what happened to us when we were trying to do research on the oceans with UCLA in our territory, the oceans in our territory. And it was on environmental DNA project. And one of the requirements of the agreement that we wrote up was that the university would hang on to that knowledge and they could use that knowledge any way they wanted. And that did not work for us. We could not ever sign an agreement that did that and such. And so we had a lot of hard talks, and we actually went to the UCOP and talked to the researchers there about this knowledge. And we got it written up that the Amah Mutsun would maintain all rights on that knowledge, and that that we could write about it, or if they wanted to write about it, they had to get permission from us in writing before they can publish anything. So that confidentiality is a huge part. Tribes must be able to hang on, to hold on and maintain the confidentiality of that knowledge. And for our tribe here, we do not share knowledge related to ceremony, and we do not share knowledge related to our medicinal plants. Medicines can be used for good, but they can also be used for bad, and it's very dangerous. And so we do not share knowledge regarding medicine plants. So that's kind of how I'd like to answer that question.
Thank you. Our next question is for Dr. Middleton Manning. And the question here is, how do you balance traditional ecological knowledge as being tribal cultural property but also a useful tool for collaborative stewardship. Do current mechanisms for collaboration allow for protection of cultural knowledge? This is kind of a nice unintended follow-up to what Val just spoke about.
I think that follows really well on Val's response. I think sometimes you have to have, well, in general, I think it's good to have these agreements in place. And our university IRB process is more tailored toward health-related research, and it's not really at all tailored toward intellectual property and cultural protection. So those are pieces I think we have to develop ourselves in the research that we do. And when you're doing collaborative research, it's all of it is a intensively communicative process in terms of, coming together for the partnership, the collaboration, what you want to accomplish, what part of it will be shared, maybe published, and then what part of it will be just focused together on implementation, on the activity on the ground. I think that's how I think of it, and the tribe takes the lead in sharing what they would like to share about the research and the process and the lessons learned from that. And also, just quickly in response to that last question, I was so happy to see that blog post quoted, because it was written by two advisees that I work with at UC Davis, Denise Martinez and then Chris Adlam, who just graduated. And I think some of what they're reflecting on is the process we've built in our collaborations around learning about cultural burning, primarily with Ron Good with North Fork Mono.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question is from another one of our forestry capstone students. Lisbeth asks, what kind of community organizing can we get involved in, as we being students? Are there any specific organizations that work directly with you and your tribe? I believe that second question is directed at Chairman Lopez.
We have the at our website, amahmutsunlandtrust.org. We have an area there where people can sign up to volunteer with our tribe. And whenever we have public events or calls out for help and stuff like that, we send it out to that list. And so that's one way. We also have, but because of COVID, these are not active now. But we had work and learn parties at the UC Santa Cruz Arboretum, where people would come in and, and we'd spend, 3 or so hours working on the native garden there. There's a 55-acre Amah Mutsun garden at the Arboretum at UC Santa Cruz. And people could, work on the garden there for 3-4 hours. And then we would share lunch. And then we'd have, and then we would talk and a learning session in the afternoons, and just teaching crafting, teaching about how to make salves, how to make jewelry, how to take care of certain plants, etc. And so that was a work, those are work and learn parties. That's another way, but if you're on the volunteer list, you'll be notified of all those opportunities. And and if you'd like to come on out and perhaps do a tour or sit down and talk to explore ways as as a larger group, we'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, Val. And just for everyone, I've put the link to the Land Trust website in the chat so you can see it there as well. All right, let's see, moving on, don't want to miss anyone. Our next question comes from Lester. He says, with all the destruction of lives and culture in the past, is there continuity of Indigenous knowledge, or has some of it had to be relearned? And I suppose that would be for either.
Did you want to go first, Beth Rose?
I would just say maybe one of the things that's been really moving in some of our cultural burn workshops has been when members from different Native nations attend and share information and share techniques. So people learning from each other, and that, like when I was rewriting a grant application to fund some of these workshops and some research that a postdoc will do, hopefully around cultural burning. One of our partners, the tribal liaison for the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, Althea Walker, mentioned that that was a goal people mentioned wanting to highlight is learning, cross-learning between Native nations. And I know that's happening. There's a Indigenous Fire Network around California and different organizations where people are sharing that information with each other to support each other's relearning of traditions in different places. And I think that's very powerful. And sometimes it's also been explained to me that in different communities within different tribes, different people hold different pieces of knowledge. You know, somebody may know many different words different in the traditional language for different plants or for certain birds or for certain places. Somebody else may know other words that refer more to familial relationships. And then when you come together and share and talk together on the land, you know, that's bringing back the knowledge within the community that's held by different people and families.
I'd like to um, answer that question as well, and that's what there's. How do you, about did we maintain that knowledge, or are we having to restore that knowledge? A little bit of background. I talked about the brutality of our history and how they wanted to destroy our culture, our spirituality, and our indigenous knowledge. And they tried, they would separate the men from the women from the children so that that knowledge would not be passed down. And that's what happened at the mission period. So we lost a tremendous amount of that indigenous knowledge of our ancestors. We know that. And in 2006, tribal elders came to a tribal council meeting and said our creation story tells us it's our responsibility to take care of Mother Earth and all living things, and we must find a way to get back to that. And we don't own, we didn't own, we do not, we still do not own an inch of land. And none of, very few of us can afford to live in our territory. I cannot afford to live in my traditional territory. And 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 we didn't know how we were going to get back, how we were going to be able to get back and take care of our lands. How could we do that? But in our culture, when the elders tell us that that's what we need to do, then that's what we need to do. So we did what our tribe always does. We prayed and we asked Creator and we asked our ancestors to help us find a way to be able to get back to our territory so that we can fulfill our obligation to Creator. And it wasn't long after that that we got a call from the superintendent at Pinnacles National Park inviting us to come on in. And he had just transferred in from another park where he had a wonderful relationship with a tribe, and he wanted that same relationship at Pinnacles National Park. And and so he invited us to come on in and to talk about how to manage the resources, how to take care of the basketry plants, how to take care of the grasslands, and how to provide interpretation for the condors, for example. And when we basically said we'll get back to you, and we went back, as a tribal council, and the truth is we were afraid to say yes because people would just, we'd feel dumb and stupid because we had lost so much of that knowledge. I mean, we didn't know how to take care of those basketry plants. We didn't know, we had one story for the condor, but we didn't know how to, what else was there beyond that. And taking care of the grasslands and our Indian potatoes, etc. We had lost that knowledge. And council said at that meeting, we took it to council, and there at that meeting, we said we have to recognize, and it wasn't me that said this, it was one of the council members says, we have to recognize that that's not our fault that happens. That is not our fault, but we have an obligation to our ancestors, and we have an obligation to our future descendants, and we have an obligation to Creator to relearn that knowledge, to restore that knowledge, relearn that knowledge. And so ever since that time, We said yes to pinnacles, and we work hard every day to help us restore that knowledge. And we do that 4 ways. We learned, we collected as much information as we can from our elders, because they all maintain these little fragments of information. And then we talked to our neighboring tribes and tribes, further away about the knowledge of how to take care of these resources. And then we got involved in a research project with UC Berkeley and the others and stuff like that. And we learned that we can learn a lot about landscapes and what kind of grasses, what specific grasses are there in the soils and stuff that help us know how to restore those landscapes. And then we find tobacco seeds, but tobacco doesn't grow on the coast, so we know that there's trade routes and stuff like that in the mountains. So we look for those trade routes now. So that research was important for us, restoring that knowledge. But most importantly for us is that our last traditional leader, she was a healer. Her name was Ascension Solorzano. And she was a very powerful healer, very successful healer. People came from other countries and across the United States to see Ascension for healing. And the Smithsonian, prior to her death, the Smithsonian sent an ethnohistorian, J.P. Harrington, to talk to her. And together they wrote 78,000 pages of indigenous notes. And the anthropological, 7,000 pages of anthropological notes on the Amah Mutsun. And she, and as a healer, she knew the medicine, the plants extremely well. And she knew the language. And it's because she was a leader, it was her job to carry forward the knowledge, our history from the mission times, from the Mexican period and the early American period. And so that right there was just a huge wealth of information for us. And with those 4 sources, we're confident that we will restore 90 to 95% of the indigenous knowledge of our ancestors. And that's what we work for every day.
Thank you very much, Chairman Lopez. We have one last question that I'm going to pose. This is for Beth Rose. I'm gonna have to scroll back up to find it. And then just to let everyone know on this Zoom, what will happen after this, we'll say thank you, we'll wrap, and then we'll ask everyone but our SBUM 183 students to leave. But we have one more question before that, so don't go yet. So question for Dr. Middleton Manning from Dr. Jody Axelson, who is a professor at UC Berkeley, although on leave. She says, what can we do in the natural resources, sciences, and management fields to further tribal rights, to repatriation and practice? This is a major and outstanding issue in lands management across so many regions, and I wonder, as a forest scientist, how to meaningfully contribute to advancing this goal.
Thank you so much. I really love that question, Jody. And I've been thinking about it here. I think, some of my answer will seem a little bit straightforward, and I think it might also relate to what I see Mike Delasso, hello, wrote above about collaboration. But I think it's really about relationship building and communication. Mike mentioned the Plumas County Fire Safe Council and Plumas National Forest contracting with, I think it's Moortown Rancheria and Greenville Rancheria tribal crews for fuel reduction. So that reflects relationship building, that folks at the tribes as well as at the Forest Service and other entities, they know each other, they've been communicating, they've been sharing information about projects, and then from that grew these contracts and these opportunities to work together for land health. So it's sometimes just that building that communication even at the local level between the local folks who are doing the management and the local people from there, to get to know one another and recognize that you share this relationship to the land, that you want it to be healthy, and then finding small ways at first and then larger ways to work together towards this end of both community health and landscape health. I think also one can never underestimate learning about the history. When I was doing the research for upstream, looking at the history of the flooding of Mountain Maidu lands for hydroelectric development at the headwaters of the State Water Project and some of PG&E's operations in Northern California. I think being able to tell these really detailed stories about whose land that was, who lived there, and who was still trying to care for and have access to that land made an impact on people. Who could be in that place and think, I'm in this place that is someone's homeland, and these people are fighting for this place. So what can I do? So that importance of learning about the history, becoming aware, and then finding common goals. And sometimes the partnership and the opportunities to work together may not immediately deal with forestry or land stewardship. It might be about something else. It might be about youth education. But then, because of the shared interest and the shared issues, these projects tend to emerge. So that's kind of broad advice, but it's really about respect, relationship building, and learning about the history of the lands and the people who are still here who are trying to care for them. Do you have anything to add, Val?
No, no, Beth Rose, you did. You did. That was good. That was good. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight, for all of your wonderful discussion questions. A very big thank you. I forgot to do this at the beginning of the meeting, but a huge thank you to the Main family, whose endowment continues to make this seminar series possible. We're very thankful to them for that. And with that, we will say, hopefully we will see many of you in 2 weeks. On the 23rd, we will have our next seminar. Capstone students, stay on. Everyone else, we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.